Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel a couple of times before. If memory serves me correctly, this will be review number 3 on the channel involving these guys, and the last beers that I've had from them were pretty solid actually, and I saw that this one was a style that I hadn't had from them before. It's also the first canned release I've seen as well, and on that basis I thought, well, let's have a look at this and see how we get on. So fingers crossed this is another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to go to an island called Igarö, which is in the Stockholm peninsula, out to the east of the city of course, and we're going to have a look at my third beer from Värmdö Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Sabotage. It comes in at 8.2% ABV, and this one is a double IPA. So this beer was released here in Sweden as part of the Local Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget for July of 2021. Like I say, it's the first canned beer that I've seen them release. They might well have done more before this, but it's certainly the first canned one that I've seen, of course. And yeah, my first IPA from them as well. The last beers that I had, I believe the first one was like some sort of kind of dark ale, if I remember rightly. But I think that video might have died. I think the camera might have destroyed, the memory card might have destroyed that video, actually. But then I also reviewed their Lussebulle Imperial Stout. That was the last one I did, and that was maybe about a year ago now. So yeah, cool to see what an IPA from these guys is going to be like. So hopefully, as I say, it's an interesting beer. But let's crack on with the review then. I'm certainly curious to see what this has in store for us, and nice to return it to Värmdö Bryggeri once again after quite a little while. But yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Värmdö Bryggeri before, and we will no doubt add some more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Värmdö Bryggeri then, on to my brewery notes. So Värmdö Bryggeri, as I've mentioned to you already, can be found on Igarö Island, just out to the east of Stockholm. And the brewery is owned, or in the early days, it was owned by 2 local entrepreneurs. This is Joachim Tillman, who is originally from Gothenburg, Göteborg, over on the Swedish west coast, and Stefan Slett. So neither of these guys had any formal training in brewing, but they were keen home brewers, and they started their company together back in the spring of 2012, releasing the first beers a few months later in October. But they're joined at the company by Ludwig Brydolf, who is a qualified sommelier, and he's the brewery's marketing director. But Joachim Tillman is no longer involved with the company, having been bought out a few years ago. But much of the original brewing equipment that these guys had was sourced from China, and they also had a bottling machine from Germany as well, which dated back to the 1950s. But in recent years, they've teamed up with a local mustery to help, increase the brewery capacity and things like that. They invested in a new bottling line as well, and they're producing in the region of 70,000 litres of beer per year, but they do have the capacity and equipment to reach 400,000 litres of beer per year apparently. But as of July 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 100 different beers, and they're also the first Swedish craft brewery to produce an alcohol-free beer as part of their regular range, and they run a brew pub at Sickla Strand as well actually, which you can go and visit. So that is something that potentially I will have to go and see at some stage. I've not been up to Stockholm all that often, maybe 2 or 3 times since I've moved over here, but yeah, I do need to go up there and film some out and about videos and meet the brewers and stuff like this. That's definitely something I would like to do at some point in the near future. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Värmdö Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn a little bit more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that is it for the moment then. Let's get on and have a taste of the beer itself. I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on the can before we open it up. There you can see at the top of the can, there is the Värmdö Bryggeri symbol. which you'll find in all their beers. The nice lighthouse there, obviously an ode to their kind of maritime heritage, or their maritime location, I guess you could say. They're out on the Stockholm Peninsula. But yeah, there you can see it's Sabotage, the name, and you can see it's got some lovely kind of hop flowers around the side there. So, you know, quite simple and quite nice artwork on this one. Does it say who is responsible for the artwork? No, don't think it does. But yeah, certainly looks quite nice. But it says, brewed in Värmdö, in Stockholm's peninsula, with water from our own well, or our own source, it says. But a full and well-balanced double IPA with high bitterness and an array of fruity, fresh hop tones. So yeah, mängder, yeah, like a multitude, I guess you could say, a variety, yeah, a mängder. But yeah, certainly very, very nicely presented, this one, I have to say. But yeah, 330 milliliter can this. I believe I paid 35 or 40 Swedish kronor for this. Let's say 40, because when it's a double IPA, that seems a bit more sensible, especially a 330. So about 40 Swedish kronor, €4, maybe about $5 American, well, $4.50 American, and then somewhere in the region of like £3.50 sterling, something like that. Just so that those of you watching in different places have a little bit of a price reference, of course. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. The Sabotage Double IPA, I'm guessing from what they say, it's going to be more of a West Coaster, which is always a good thing. I do miss the West Coasters, but let's see how we go with this beer. I had a little quick look on Untappd and on the website to see if there was anything about the hops used in this beer or whatever, but wasn't anything forthcoming. So yes, we'll see. There we are. But yeah, the ingredients listed on this one are corn and wheat. So yeah, it's, you know, in some West Coast IPAs you will find a little bit of wheat, but I'm thinking that it probably will be more of a West Coaster if it's going to be a more high bitterness beer. And if it was a New England, they probably would have put oats in it as well. But yeah, anyway, this does look a little bit more like a West Coaster. But yeah, before the head disappears on this one, we can say that it's poured with about a 1/3 frothy, I would say kind of creamy coloured head. It's not a perfect white, that is fading away to be a rather thin foamy layer, but you can see the colour of this beer is quite a rich amber. So there's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass there. There's a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head as well. But yeah, colour wise, this one is definitely a kind of rich amber. It's not the darkest of ambers you're going to come across. I think maybe a medium amber is probably a nice way to describe this one, but you can feel that it's, you can definitely get the vibe that it's a nice kind of lighter, hazy kind of thing to it. So it's got a little bit of that natural haze is what I mean to say. Brain isn't working. But yeah, remember the colour of your beer is dependent on 1, the type of malts that you use, 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar's caramelised, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. And then any adjuncts you put in and any barrel aging you do is also going to play a role as well. But when it comes to IPAs, those 2 factors can be negated. It's usually sour beers like Berliner Weisses, Goses, and so on that those will play a role. But yeah, nice looking beer, this one, kind of as you would expect for a West Coast IPA, a bit of the natural haze type thing, and you know, this kind of medium amber is what you would expect as well. So yeah, I like how this beer goes about its bitterness, goes about its business. I don't know about its bitterness yet, but yeah, I do like how it goes together. This one, it certainly looks the part of a West Coast IPA. So yeah, nothing overly surprised about the appearance of this one. Let's have a look at the aroma and see how we go then. So, yeah, it's actually quite a sweet and malty leaning. It's actually quite a sweet malty leaning IPA, this one. So yeah, it's actually quite a sweet, yes, as I say, it's quite a sweet malty leaning IPA, this one, so you can smell a bit of a breadiness to it, like there's a sort of brown bready thing. It almost smells a wee bit like Vienna malty, come to think of it, which is quite interesting. But I think there's quite a lot of caramel in this. I do like it actually. I find these, you know, with West Coast IPAs, I always say there's 2 different directions you can take these. They can be big and oily and caramelly, or they can be more kind of biscuity and bready leaning. This one's got a lot of bread, but it's also got a hell of a lot of caramel in it as well. I'll say that straight away. But yeah, the aroma of this is actually, it's very, very sweet. I'll say that straight away. But yeah, very sweet, oily. You know, sweet and caramelly and kind of oily malt base to it, but the fruits are also quite oily and kind of like dried fruity in character as well, I would say. But let's just try and break this down a little bit more and describe it for you a wee bit more kind of succinctly. Something at the back of my throat there. There we go. But yeah, as we say, the malty backbone of this, you can smell a lovely kind of thick white bready character to this one. There's definitely elements of kind of bread crust and things in there as well. Yeah, definitely some elements of bread crust in there, which for sure. So I really like how that goes together in this one, definitely. So the bready backbone in this one is quite nice, and I think the more that you smell of that, the more it kind of smoothens out, and that's the wheat, I think, that's going to be influencing that. You get a big white bready backbone. There's some lovely kind of fresh bread crusty notes to it as well, but you certainly get a lot of brown sugar to this one. You can smell there is a little bit of that kind of Werther's Original sort of butter candy type thing to this one. You really get that out of this beer, but you do get a straight up sweet caramel. You also get a little bit of a more kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing as well, which I do enjoy. But yeah, it's very sweet. It's really like, as I say, Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotch. That is exactly what you get out of this beer. Yeah, almost fudgy. It's almost, I would almost go to the extent of saying that this has got a bit of vanilla fudge in it, which is quite interesting. So yeah, for sure, I would say that about this particular beer. Lovely big kind of smooth bready element to it. But yeah, the aroma that comes out of this is certainly quite interesting, I'll say. But yeah, the aroma from this one, I do very much like, I have to say. The malty backbone of this one, for me, it's quite attractive. Some people might find it a little bit sickly, but it's a very sweet malty backbone that you have to this one. Other than that, I don't think there's too much to say about the malty side of things. So let's focus on the hops. Hoppy wise, it's got a little bit of earthiness to it. For sure, you can smell a wee bit of that at the back of the nose. You've got a nice there's a wee herbal quality to it and some nice floral aromaticity as well. But I wouldn't describe it as being too kind of big and bitter in that sense, but you've got some grassy, as I say, you've got a little bit of a kind of grassy sort of citrusy zest coming out of this beer too, which is interesting. So yeah, a few quirky things going on with this one, which I can certainly appreciate, but yeah, the aromas coming out of this beer are very nice, I will say that for sure. But yeah, the green component for me, I do like that, and I think the green component balances the beer out. But yeah, it's quite smooth. The green components of this beer are quite smooth. But remember, West Coast IPAs tend to rely on early edition hops a lot more than their New England counterparts. The early edition hops are the ones that give you the bitterness and things like that, whereas it's the late edition hops that give you the flavour and aroma and stuff like this. And West Coast IPAs use both, whereas New England IPAs rely on later edition hops. Bear that in mind. But yeah, the fruity side of things with this beer is certainly quite interesting as well. So you've got a nice kind of quite fresh green component to it, but quite smooth at the same time. Fruity wise, it's a bit difficult to pick out exactly what's going on here because of how strong the brown sugars are. But I would say, we sugar the beer up a little bit. You get a little bit of a kind of pungenty tropical thing. You get a wee bit of a slight passion fruit to it. There's a wee bit of juicy, mango in there, but it comes across as very sort of candied in a sense. There's a lot of dried fruit in there as well, sultanas, apricots, stuff like this. And I want to say there is a wee bit of a kind of orangey note out of this one. So it's really difficult to pick out the hops in this just because of how powerful the kind of brown sugary element to this beer is. But the fruits are very oily. So say a bit of orange, you get a wee bit of that pungenty passion fruit to it. Mango, apricots and sultanas and things like that. The tropical fruits come across as quite dried because of how powerful that brown sugary note is. So yeah, this is quite an interesting aroma, this one, to be honest with you. It's very sweet, so just be aware of that. So yeah, I have to say I'm just really curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us, but take a bit of time to enjoy that. I like the sweetness of the aroma, as I've explained in other videos. I always call it the Scottish sweet tooth. I'm a big sucker for quadruples, Scotch ales, these big sweet barley wines and stuff like that, Dunkels as well as the other one. So I'm a sucker for these kind of beers, and I like the big caramelly, chewy West Coast IPAs. So for me, this aroma is very attractive, but I can see other people saying that it might be a little bit sickly for them. So yeah, bear that in mind with this one. But I think it's about time that we took a look at this beer to see how we get on with the tasting. So yeah, this is the Sabotage Double IPA coming in at 8.2% ABV from Värmdö Bryggeri on Igarö, close to Stockholm. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Yeah, this is like a big malty, oily kind of thing, this for sure. Yeah, not sure what to make of this one. You get the bitterness coming out of it a little bit later on. Yeah, you can really feel the bitterness. The bitterness really comes out of this one the further you go into the aftertaste, definitely. It takes a wee while to come out. It sort of comes out gradually, and then it's like... But yeah, the malt base in this one is, you know, big and thick and oily, if you like. See, I'm not 100% sure what to make of this one. This beer feels quite raw and sort of unrefined in a way, if you like. Although, the thing, when I make a statement like that, the thing that I have to bear in mind is that, you know, the West Coast IPAs that you get these days are sort of stripped down to a degree. They don't have the same level of IBUs, and I think the malt bases tend to be a little bit kind of thinner and crisper, if you like. A lot of the West Coast IPAs you'll see brewed these days are not the big, thick, oily things like this one is trying to go for. They tend to be a little bit more, you know, leaning towards the lighter, bready sort of thing, the kind of lighter, biscuity, crispy side of the West Coast IPA. So the two prime examples, I would say, the two benchmarks you have, I think, with the West Coast IPAs, at least from my frame of reference. Remember, everyone has their own frame of reference. For me, the biscuity, sort of biscuity, bready West Coast IPAs, the pinnacle one would be Pliny the Elder, whereas if you go to the more oily end of the spectrum, I would say, you know, Sierra Nevada Torpedo would be the one I first discovered like this, and this one definitely leans a little bit more towards the Sierra Nevada Torpedo. Now, I would say that this beer, in a lot of ways, the malt base, it's like a big sort of mass of bread and sweetness all kind of, you know, going together. That's what this one. That's why I say it feels a little bit raw and kind of undefined in a sense, because you know, it's kind of, and that probably is because it seems to be between the two different types, if you can call it that, of the West Coast IPA for me. So that's maybe why I would say that, but it has a little bit of that kind of homebrewed type vibe to it. As I've said, I've had a few West Coast IPAs from homebrewers that I've reviewed on the channel, and this one does remind me of that, actually. So, you know, maybe it needs, you know, the bready component of the malt just taken down a wee bit. Maybe it's got a little bit too much wheat in it, and that just thickens it out a little touch too much. I mean, the flavour of the malt base is actually quite nice in a sense. I do like the flavour of the malt base, but it's the overall kind of feel of the beer. It just feels a little bit, let's say, raw, and it could be refined a little bit more, I would say. But yeah, flavour wise, it's got what you would expect of the West Coast IPA. It's got a big brown caramelly sugar component. It's got a bit of bitter hoppy character and a nice oily fruit. So it's got a lot of stuff in there, right? But I suspect with this one, I think there's perhaps potentially just a bit too much wheat in this one, in honesty. So that could be the thing. It could also have just a little touch too much kind of caramel in it or something. I'm not 100% sure. But the other thing, the yeast might be playing a role in this as well. I don't know what kind of yeast they would have been using in it. But it has the right sort of flavour profile. It's just the balance of the flavours is a little bit kind of off, I would say. So it's an interesting one. I like, as I say, I like this beer. It's just not kind of what I would expect. I just think it could be a wee bit more refined and a wee bit more balanced in a sense. I would say that. But as I say, the actual flavour, the way that the fruits combine with the malt and the bit of hoppy character you have, I think that's onto it with that. My advice to them would be, you know, play about with the malt base a little bit. Just balance it out a little bit more. Brew a few little pilot batches of this and just find the right ratio of the wheat, the pale malt or whatever, and the kind of brown sugary malts that you have in this, because the flavour profile is, you know, what you would want from a West Coast IPA. It's just bit too bready in a sense, I would say. But let's break the flavour down for you a wee bit and just describe it a wee bit more succinctly. But straight away across the middle third of your palate, as I say, you get that nice kind of white bready kind of quality there. It just blankets the middle of your tongue. It does actually have a wee bit of a kind of almost bitiness to it, particularly that bready character blankets the middle third and the back third of your palate. You can feel that there. As you go towards the back third of your palate, it's certainly more kind of wheaty and bitey in a sense. So absolutely. But yeah, the way that this goes together is lovely. In that sense, that I say I like the flavour of this malt base. It's just a bit too thick on the bready side of things. But yeah, big, thick, white bready notes in the middle of your palate. If you go to either end of that middle third of your palate, you can feel it's a wee bit more kind of bready, in a sense. Then on top of that, you can feel the brown sugary layers coming out. So like I say, in the middle, you've almost got like a circle in the middle of your palate, and you can feel a sort of Werther's Original kind of butter candy type base to this one. When you go beyond that, it's a little bit more kind of biscuity and grainy, but on top of that Werther's Original layer, you can feel the big oily caramel, and it's quite a concentrated and boozy caramel right in the middle of your palate. And you would expect this from the West Coast IPA, of course. They do show their booze a little bit. So there's definitely a bit of caramel, or kind of Turo or crystal malt, there's something like that in this one. It does taste quite authentically American, this, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're using proper American malts in this. But yeah, you can get a lovely, I think there might be a bit of Cara Munich in this as well. There's just something familiar about the breadiness in this beer and the sort of sweetness that it has. The bready quality in this beer is quite sweet. But like I say, on top of that Werther's Original layer, you've got a bit of a concentrated sweet caramel in there, and you can feel that just sort of spreads a little bit further out, and then, as I say, Werther's Original, and then towards the extremities of that middle third of your palate, it's a bit more kind of biscuity, McVitie's digestive biscuity like. But that is the middle third of your palate. Back third of your palate then, so the border region between middle third and back third of your palate in this beer, you can feel a little bit of a bready build-up, wee bit of bread crust in there. Then the base of the back third of your palate, as we say, is the sort of white bready note in there. You can certainly get a bit of wheaty bitiness towards the back of that front third of your palate. You get a wee bit of bread crusty quality in there as well. But on top of all of that, you can feel the more airy, yeasty kind of note out of the beer. And the bread that's in this, it's the bready, yeasty notes you get out of this. It's a sort of sweet, almost wholemeal type brown bread that you get in there. But I think that covers the malty and yeasty aspects of this beer fairly kind of succinctly. I think that's a fair assessment of this one. I would say that. But yeah, as I say, the malt base grows on me a little bit more the more that I drink of this one, and it does get a bit more oily and sweet, I would say, but I think the breadiness of it potentially needs to be a little bit more balanced, if you like. This beer strikes me as being like a kind of a first sort of good attempt, if you like, if that makes sense. It's like the first good attempt you would do as a home brewer at the West Coast IPA. I think it could just be refined a little bit more. As I was saying, I think it's the breadiness that's just a bit too thick in this one. I think you've got to kind of choose. You've either got it's either that the breadiness is right and they've just put a bit too much brown sugary malt in it, or the breadiness is a bit too much and the brown sugar combined with that just makes the beer feel very kind of gloopy in its malt base. But the flavour profile, as I say, they have the flavour profile of this. They just need to play with the malt ratios and stuff, I think. But yeah, anyway, on to the hoppy side of things. And the hoppy side of things is spot on. But yeah, back corners of the palate, you've got a wee bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, it's a little bit herbal. And as you push towards the kind of front corners of the palate, it's a little bit more kind of, floral and aromatic. As we say, there's a nice little bit of a spicy kind of element to this one. A bit of Columbus maybe, which I really like. So yeah, nice little bit of Columbus kind of spice out of this one. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a wee bit of Chinook in here as well, because you do get a bit of that kind of piney resin to it. The hops are certainly more pungent in the flavour than they were in the aroma, but around the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and sort of grassy, I would say. But yeah, around the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and more kind of grassy in a sense. So yeah, the way that it goes together is very, very nice actually. So yeah, the green component of this one for me is spot on. It is exactly what you'd expect of a West Coast IPA. A little bit more bitterness and everything, but we'll come to that later. So front third of your palate then. and the fruity side of things. So border region between front third and middle third of your palate again. You get a little bit of a more kind of bready build up to this one. Wee bit of a kind of bread crusty quality in there. In the base of the front third of your palate, you've got a nice sort of smooth brown bready element to this one. And the bread actually comes across as quite sweet in this. But on top of that, of course, you've got that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. At the back of the front third of your palate, you certainly get a little bit more of a kind of oily passion fruity note out of the beer. As you move further forward from that, it's a little bit more kind of you get a little bit more of a kind of mango-y note out of it for sure. Yeah, it's the tropical side of this beer is actually quite pungent in a sense. I'd be curious to know what hop they've used in this. But yeah, there's a wee bit of a pungency. You actually get a bit of grapefruit out of this, a bit of a stronger passion fruit than a more oily mango, and there's one or two little apricot-y undertones to that as well. But as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, it's a more kind of oily, orangey character. I wouldn't be surprised if this is something like Citra and Amarillo that's in here. This is a proper old school kind of flavour that you're getting from this one. So yeah, I do like how that side of the beer goes together. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a bit of Columbus, Chinook, Citra and Amarillo. I think that might be the hop bill in this one. I don't think will be too different from those ones that I've mentioned. There are a few, it could be Mosaic that's in it, of course, but yeah, I think it's something like that you get in this beer. But the front half of that front third of your palate is certainly quite orangey and oily, so I like that for sure. But yeah, on the mouthfeel side of things, I think we've covered the flavour as much as we can really. This beer is definitely kind of bottom end of full bodied for me. Carbonation is very smooth. It's a big, thick, oily beast, this. So yeah, it's a big, oily, it's a big, full bodied, oily beer. This one, in terms of bitterness, I think it probably is about 70, 80 IBUs, this one, but it takes a bit of time for the bitterness to build, I think. But remember, always take my IBU counts with a pinch of salt. This is my weakest point of beer reviewing by quite a distance, I would say. But yeah, the malt base in this one is, as we say, it's got a really thick malt base to it. On the top it's oily, but then underneath you get a lot of thick kind of bready elements to it. And then towards the front of the tongue you've got a more oily kind of, as we say, you've got a more sort of oily, sweet kind of vibe out of this beer. So yeah, I like how this one goes about its business, that's for sure. It's got a really interesting kind of oily, fruity quality to it in my mind. So it gets a big thumbs up from me in that regard. I really like how that side of the beer goes about its business for sure. So yeah, it's a big, the mouthfeel of this one they've got spot on for a West Coast IPA, and the flavour profile they've got spot on. As I say, I think they just need to refine the malt part of the recipe in this, because it just feels, as I say, I think either it's got a bit too much wheat malt in it, or the bready side of the beer is just a bit too thick, or they've potentially put a little bit too much, brown sugar malt in it and then used the wheat to kind of compensate maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But as I say, it's got a nice kind of brew pub sort of rawness to it like this one. It comes across like a sort of, a good homebrew West Coast IPA, this one, but not quite refined enough, I think, for the sort of commercial side of things. But the flavour profile, as I say, is right there. They just need to play with the malt base, and then I think they're on to a winner with this. So yeah, this is the kind of flavour profile I like from an old school West Coast IPA. The big oily caramel, the big kind of dank bitterness, and the oily fruits. They've got this all right in this one. Just play with the malt base a little bit, then they're on to a winner for me. So yeah, this is an interesting one, that's for sure. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this. This one is the Sabotage West Coast IPA, double IPA I should say, coming in at 8.2% ABV from Värmdö Bryggeri in Igarö, out to the east of Stockholm. Interesting beer this, and I'm glad we got the chance to taste this here on the channel. Nice to return to these guys after a little while as well, so I need to see if there's another IPA that I can have a go at. But I think, in terms of their West Coast IPAs, I will try another one in a couple of months or something if they do release one. I'd be very curious to see how they're doing these beers a little further down the road. But yeah, very nice stuff. So let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Värmdö Bryggeri as well. We will return to these guys, like I said. I would recommend that you try their Lussebulle Imperial Stout. I thought that was a very, very nice beer. The very first one that I had that was like a kind of mead or whatever it was, that was very nice as well, and I just wish that review had survived. But yeah, an interesting beer, this one, worth trying if you want a proper old school West Coast IPA. But yeah, let's leave it there. Thank you again for watching my reviews. Check out my social media, check out Värmdö Bryggeri's social media. This is the Sabotage West Coast Double IPA, 8.2% ABV. I'll see you guys in the next one. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.